They dressed her in white and walked her to the river to die. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply grown up without parents, and in this village, that meant she had grown up without anyone to say no on her behalf. But what those elders did not know, what no one standing on that riverbank knew, was that this girl's dead father had buried a secret beneath the mango tree that could destroy the most powerful man in the village, and the chief's son had found it. That morning, the village of Yumuz woke before sunrise. The air was still cold, still carrying the memory of last night's rain, and the smell of wet, red earth rose up from the ground, the way grief rises quietly, without asking permission. The sky above the palm trees was the deep blue of a world that had not yet decided whether to be kind, and at the edge of the great river Ogi, a young woman named Obiageli stood alone, wearing the white cloth of offering, her hands folded in front of her like a prayer she had already stopped believing in. The river Ugi had flooded for 3 seasons without mercy. The yams were rotting beneath muddy water. The cassava had drowned in the fields. Children were going to bed hungry, and old people were praying to gods who seemed to have turned their faces away. And so the council of elders had met, and they had made their decision. A life must be given. A young woman, unmarried, without family, without anyone to say no. The premise was real. The danger was real. And the morning was moving forward, whether anyone was ready for it or not. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss a story, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Obiageli had always been the kind of girl the village noticed without seeing. She was the daughter of Chukwudi, the farmer, a quiet man with big hands, and a laugh that came from somewhere deep in his chest, who had died bringing Obayale into the world. Obiageli grew up knowing only one parent, and then, when she was 12, the fever took her father too, and she grew up knowing none. After that, she lived in the smallest room of her Uncle Oka's compound, a room that smelled of old thatch and damp earth, barely large enough to stretch her arms wide. She cooked for her uncle's family, carried water from the stream before the sun rose, weeded the garden until her palms cracked, and returned to that small dark room each night without complaint. She did not beg. She did not shrink. She held her head with a kind of quiet dignity that people noticed without being able to explain, the way you notice the smell of something clean in a place that is dirty. The older women of the village called her the girl with the river eyes, because her eyes were calm and deep, the way water is calm even when there is something moving beneath it. And when anyone asked Obiageli how she was managing, she would smile. A small, real smile, and she would say something her father had once told her. The sun does not stop rising because one person does not notice it. So, I keep rising. That was who she was. And then there was Amechi. Amechi was the only son of Chief Odinaka, the most powerful man in Yumuz, whose compound sat at the top of the hill and whose word carried weight like the sound of the great organ drum at the new moon. Amici was 24, broad-shouldered, with a kind of stillness that comes not from weakness but from restraint. He had grown up watching his father settle disputes, watching elders argue over land and cattle and bride price, watching the village function according to rules that were older than any of them. He had also grown up watching Obiageli, not in the way young men watch young women, though that was also true if he was being honest with himself, but he had watched the way she carried suffering without letting it bend her. He had watched her refuse to become bitter. He had once seen her, at the age of 15, give her own meal to a younger child who was crying from hunger, and then turn away before anyone could see that she was still hungry herself. And something in him had decided, in that precise and ordinary moment, that Obiageli was the bravest person he had ever met. He had never told her. There had always seemed to be time. Now, the thing that had set all of this in motion was the floods. For 3 seasons, the river Ogi had swollen beyond its banks, spreading dark water across the farmlands, swallowing roads, filling the lower compounds with cold, muddy water that smelled of river bottom and rot. The village was in crisis, and when a village is in crisis, fear has a way of becoming a weapon, and weapons have a way of finding their way to the hands of people who already wanted to use them. Elder Izugo was the oldest and most powerful member of the Council of Elders. A was a tall, rigid man with a voice like dry wood, cracking, cold, certain, impossible to ignore. He smiled without warmth, gave opinions as though they were facts, and had ruled the council through a combination of age and intimidation for 15 years. He was the one who had proposed the sacrifice, and he had proposed Obiageli by name. Why? An orphan, the other elders had murmured. An unmarried girl. Yes, but why this particular girl? Elder Ezugo had answered smoothly. Because she has no family to object, and the river god requires a pure heart willingly given. But there was something else, something no one in the council had thought to question, something that had not yet risen to the surface, but was moving through the deep water, the way truth always does, slow and certain and cold. Amitsi heard about the decision at sunrise. 3 days before the ceremony was planned, he had been in his father's compound, drinking morning tea and watching the pale light grow over the compound walls, when his childhood friend Emeka arrived with eyes that were too wide and a voice that was too quiet. Amitsi, Emeka said, and stopped. Say it, Amici told him. The elders chose a sacrifice for the river Ogi, Emeka said. They are saying she must be given at dawn on the day of the new moon. They chose Obiageli. The cup of tea was still warm in Amiki's hand. He set it down very slowly on the wooden stool beside him. He looked at Emeka's face to see if this was a misunderstanding, something that could be explained away in the next breath. Emeka's face told him it was not. Amechi stood up. He walked to his father's room, where the chief was still sleeping in the heavy, quiet way of old men who have earned their rest. He knocked once, and then again harder, and then he pushed the door open. Chief Odinaka sat up, blinking in the early light. They chose Obiageli, Amechi said. Did you know? His father was quiet for a long moment. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. The weight of a decision already made, of words already swallowed. Then the old man said, The elders made their decision in council. I was not opposed. Something cold moved through Amesi's chest. She is an orphan, father. She has no one. You sat in that room and said nothing. Well, Amechi, the chief's voice was tired, not angry. The river has taken everything. The people are afraid. When people are afraid, they need something to hold on to. They chose her because she cannot fight back, Amici said. His voice was steady, but barely. And you allowed it because it was easier than saying no. He left the room before his father could answer. For 2 days, Amici moved through the village with a purpose that no one could quite name. He spoke to the elders, formally, respectfully, making his case through proper channels, the way he had been raised to do. He argued that the river had never demanded human life. He argued that the old texts of offerings spoke of grain and palm wine and prayer, not blood. He argued that this was not tradition, but a corruption of it. Elder Zugo listened to all of it with the smile of a man who has already won. The boy speaks with passion, the elder said, addressing the other council members as though Amechi were not standing right there in the room, right there in front of him. But he is young. He does not understand what the river requires. The decision is made. That night, an old woman came to find Amici. Her name was Nikechi. She was 70 years old and blind in one eye, and she smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, and she moved through the village at night, as though the darkness were her own home. She had known Obievili's father, Chukuri, since they were children together in this very compound, running barefoot through the dust while their parents called them in for supper. She sat down across from Amici, without being invited, folded her hands on her knee, and said without greeting, "You are asking the wrong questions." Amechi looked at her carefully. "What do you mean? You are asking why Obiageli was chosen," Nidkechi said. "You should be asking why Elder Ezugo chose her specifically. There is a difference, and the difference has a name." She paused. The fire between them crackled low, and in its light her face looked like something carved from old wood, patient, knowing, carrying years of secrets without being crushed by them. "Obiageli's father knew something about Elder Ezugo," Nkichi said. "Something the elder has spent 15 years trying to make sure no one remembers. Before Chukuri died, he hid something. I do not know where, but I know he hid it because he told me he did. He said, if something happens to me, tell the right person, at the right time." He could not have known that his own daughter would be the one who needed saving. but I believe he knew that a time like this would come. She stood to leave. "Nkechi," Amechi said. What did he know? The old woman turned. Her one good eye caught the firelight and held it. "Go find what he buried," she said quietly. "Then you will understand what kind of man you are really fighting." She walked back into the darkness, and Amethi sat alone by the dying fire with a question he could not stop asking. Amechi did not sleep that night. He sat by the dying fire and thought about Chukudi, a man he had barely known, a quiet farmer who had carried his daughter on his back through the market and argued gently over prices, and once fixed the fence of a neighbor without being asked or thanked, a man who had buried something and trusted that the right person would one day dig it up. When the compound was fully quiet and the moon had moved halfway across the sky, Amechi lit a small oil lamp and walked out alone into the sleeping village. He went to what remained of Chukwudi's old compound, a crumbling structure at the edge of the village that no one had touched since the farmer died, because it was thought to carry grief inside its walls, the way a room carries the smell of someone who has left. The thatch roof had caved in on one side. The mud walls were cracking, but the mango tree in the center of the compound still stood tall and old and certain of itself, its roots curling above the earth like fingers holding on. Amechi crouched at the base of the tree and pressed his hand to the ground. He began to dig with his hands in the soft earth between the roots, working slowly, listening to the night sounds around him, frogs singing by the stream, wind moving through the palm leaves, the distant bark of a dog at something only dogs can see. His fingers found something wrapped in oil, buried no more than an arm's length down, where the earth was looser, where someone had dug before him and covered his work with careful hands. A small bundle. Inside, 2 folded papers, old, water-stained at the edges, but legible in the lamplight, and a carved wooden seal. Amechi held the lamp closer and read. The papers were land records, official ones drawn up by the district surveyor 15 years ago, bearing the seal of the land registry that had managed colonial-era holdings before the community restored its own governance. They showed a large parcel of land, a very large parcel of fertile land along the northern bank of the river Ogi, formerly recorded as community land, belonging to the village in trust for all families. Equally, but there was a second document beneath the first, a transfer note, signed with a name that made Amechi's blood go cold. Elder Izugo had transferred that land to himself, secretly, using his position on the council to sign documents that the rest of the elders had never seen in a single afternoon when the other council members were attending a burial in the neighboring village. The community land, hundreds of acres of the richest farmland in the region, had been quietly placed in the elder's personal name, and Chukwudi, whose family's plot bordered that northern land, had discovered it. The carved wooden seal at the bottom of the bundle was the mark of the land registry, proof that the documents were genuine. Amechi sat in the ruined compound with the papers in his hands and felt the full weight of what he was holding. The smell of old earth rose up around him, the smell of dampened roots and buried things. Elder Izugo had stolen the village's land. Chukwudi had known, and Chukwudi had died of fever, everyone said. But sitting there in the dark, with documents that showed exactly what Chukwudi had risked by knowing the truth, Amechi could not stop the cold particular feeling that perhaps that fever had not been entirely natural. And now Chukwudi's daughter was dressed in white. He wrapped the documents carefully in the oilskin and held them against his chest as he walked back through the sleeping village. The next morning, Amechi went to find Amechi. He spread the documents on the ground between them and watched his friend's face change as he read. "This is the community's land," Emeka said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All the farming plots along the north bank. This is where half the village grows food. He owns all of it. In his own name. 15 years, Amechi said. He has been collecting silent rent from tenant farmers who do not even know they are renting from him. Every flood season that ruins the crops along the north bank ruins their harvests, but his income from the land stays fixed. He gets paid either way." Emeka stared at him. And Chukwudi found out. He buried the proof. And now Elder Izugo wants his daughter silenced. The same way Amechi folded the papers with hands that were not entirely steady, not because the river god is angry, because a guilty man is afraid of a dead man's daughter growing old enough to find what her father left behind. The two men sat with that truth in silence. Outside the window, the village sounds continued. Children calling to each other, a woman pounding yam, the ordinary sounds of a morning that did not know what was inside it. "What do you do now?" Emeka asked. "Now," Amici said, "I go to my father." He laid the documents before Chief Odinaka on the low table in the chief's inner room, smoothing them flat with careful hands, and he waited while his father read. He watched the old man's face move through disbelief, then recognition, then a kind of tired, worn-out sorrow, the sorrow of a man who realizes he has been made a fool of for a very long time by someone he thought he knew. When the chief finished reading, he was quiet for almost a full minute. "I knew Ezugo was difficult," the old man said finally. "I knew he was ambitious. I did not know he was this." "Now you do," Amici said. His father looked up at him. "Son, if we bring this forward, Ezugo will not accept it quietly. He has influence. He will say, 'These documents are forgeries.' He will say you buried them yourself to protect the girl." "Maybe he will say those things," Amici said, "but the land registry seal is real. I checked it against the seal on the council's own founding papers, and there is a man in the district office who spent 30 years working with the old registry. His name is Obina Nwachukwu. If anyone in this village can verify these documents, it is him." His father leaned forward. He opened his mouth. For one brief, bright moment, it seemed as if the chief would agree, as if the evidence would be enough, as if a father's authority in a son's discovery would add up to justice, right here, right now, before the sun moved any further across the sky. And then his head servant appeared at the doorway and said that Elder Ezugo was outside requesting an audience. Elder Ezugo walked into the room with the ease of a man who has never doubted his own authority. He glanced at the papers on the table. He did not react the way a guilty man reacts when he has been caught. He reacted the way a powerful man reacts when he has been mildly inconvenienced, with the faint, tolerant patience of someone who intends to remain in control of this conversation. "I see, my young friend has been digging in old places," the elder said, seating himself without being invited, folding his hands over his walking stick. "Chief Odinaka, I came to offer a warning. There are people in this village who wish to use this sacred ceremony as an opportunity to undermine the authority of the council. If the ceremony does not proceed, and the river floods again before the harvest, it will not be the council that the people blame, it will be you. And your son." He said it gently, almost like advice from an old friend. But it was not advice. It was a threat dressed in silk. Chief Odinaka looked at his son, and in that look, Amici saw the answer. He saw the careful calculations of an old man who had managed power for decades by never spending more than he had to. He saw the fear that lived behind authority. He saw his father choose safety over justice, not out of wickedness, but out of the particular cowardice that comes from having too much to lose. "The ceremony will proceed as planned," the chief said. His voice was strained, and his eyes did not meet Ameci's. "We will address the land matter through proper channels afterward." Elder Ezugo smiled. The smile of a man who has just won something, stood bowed shallowly, and left. Amici stood very still in the silence that followed. "Father," he said, barely above a breath. The chief would not look at him. Amici picked up the documents from the table, tucked them inside his robe, and walked out. He had believed, for a moment, that evidence would be enough, that his father's name would carry the weight of justice. He had been wrong. The ceremony was at dawn. It was now evening. He had one night, so Amici made a different kind of decision. He went to the compound of Obina Nwachukwu, a man who had worked with the old land registry for 30 years, and who was known throughout Umusezes, whose word was as solid as carved mahogany. He showed Obina the documents. He watched the man study them for a long, silent time, holding them up to the warm glow of his lamp. Checking the seal against entries in a worn leather ledger, he pulled from a wooden trunk that smelled of old paper and years. "These are authentic," Obina said finally. "This seal is genuine." This transfer was made illegally. It was never put before the full council for approval, as required by the community charter. Under that charter, the transfer is void. This land still belongs to the village of Umus. He paused. "Who else knows you have these?" "My father," Amici said. "And Elder Ezugo knows they exist, though he does not know you have seen them. Obina looked at him steadily in the lamplight. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to stand beside me tomorrow morning," Amechi said. "At the river?" The old man folded the documents and handed them back. He sat very still for a long time, the kind of stillness that is not indecision, but prayer, the quiet of a man settling something inside himself before he commits to an action that cannot be taken back. Then he said, "I have lived in this village 60 years. I watched Chukudi grow from a boy to a man. I watched him buried. If what you are telling me is right, then I owe his daughter at least this much." He placed both hands on his walking stick and stood slowly. "I will be there," he said. Dawn came cold and gray, the sky above Yumuz heavy with cloud, the river Oji running high and dark along its banks. The water smelled of things from far upstream, rain from other hills, earth from other places. The cold, deep smell of a river that has traveled a very long way to be here. They brought Obiageli at first light. She walked between two elder women who held her arms gently, not cruelly, but firmly, the way people hold something they believe must be surrendered. She wore the white cloth of offering, and her feet were bare and the ground was cold beneath them. Her hair had been plaited close to her head. Her eyes were open, and they were calm. She was not crying. This was what it looked like, Amechi thought, as he watched from 30 paces away astride his horse. This was what it looked like to be brave without hope. The whole village had gathered on the bank. He could see their faces, people he had grown up with, people he knew by name, people who had held him as a baby and brought his family food during illness, standing in silence with the particular expression of people who know something is wrong, but have told themselves they have no power to stop it. He would not accept that. He kicked the horse forward. The crowd parted. The sound of hooves on cold, damp earth was sharp and deliberate in the morning quiet. The elder women stopped walking. Obiageli looked up. Amechi swung down from the horse and stepped between Obiageli and the water. He planted his feet on the muddy bank and did not move. "Move aside, son of the chief," Elder Izugo said, from his position at the head of the council. His voice was even, certain, the voice of a man who has never in 15 years encountered an obstacle he could not root around. "You are interfering in a sacred ceremony." "I am ending an illegal one," Amechi said. He had the documents in his hand, raised high where every person on that bank could see them. "People of Yumuz," he said, and his voice carried clearly across the quiet. "I am going to tell you what I found buried beneath the mango tree in the compound of the late Chukudi, Obiageli's father. I am going to tell you why Elder Izugo chose this girl by name, and when I am finished, you will all understand why she must not take a single step toward that water." Elder Izugo took one step forward. "The boy is disturbed. He has allowed his feelings for a girl, too. The community land on the north bank," Amechi said, loud and clear. "All of it. 340 acres of the finest farmland in this region. This man," he pointed at Elder Izugo with a steady, open hand, transferred it to himself 15 years ago, with documents that were never shown to the full council, never approved, never legitimate. Chukudi discovered the truth. He recorded it and hid it before he died. And Elder Izugo chose Obiageli for this ceremony, not because the river god requires her, but because Obiageli is the only person alive who might one day find what her father buried. The silence on the river bank was absolute, not the silence of agreement. The silence of a crowd holding its breath. Obina no Achuku stepped forward from the crowd, moping slowly with the unhurried certainty of a man who has nothing left to prove and no time left to waste. "I have examined those documents," Obina said. His voice was quiet, but it reached every corner of the bank. "I worked with the land registry for 30 years. Those documents are genuine. The seal is genuine. The transfer was made illegally. The North Bank land belongs to this community, and it has always belonged to this community." The sound that moved through the crowd then was not quite words, and not quite silence. It was the sound of understanding arriving in many minds at once, slow and inevitable, like a tide. Elder Izugo's composure did not crack. "Not Immediately, he stood with his walking stick planted before him, and his chin raised, and his eyes cold, and he spoke with the smooth certainty of a man who has talked his way out of things for a very long time. "These are forgeries," he said. "The son of the chief and an aging clerk have manufactured, then deny it to my face," Amechi said. He walked forward until he was close enough to speak quietly, privately, just to the elder and the council members nearest to them. "Deny that you knew Chukuri was suspicious of you," Amechi said. "Deny that you watched him sicken and did not send for a doctor when there was still time to save him. Deny that you stood at his funeral and held Obiasli's hand and told her you would always look out for her. Deny that you went to the council chamber 3 days ago and spoke her name first when they asked who should be chosen." Something moved across Elder Ezugo's face, something fast and dark, like a shadow crossing water, here and gone before you could be certain you saw it. He denied nothing. "I did what was necessary," the elder said finally. His voice had changed. The certainty was still there, but the warmth had drained entirely out of it, the way heat leaves a stone after the fire dies. This village was drowning. The people needed to believe that something was being done. An offering restores order. It restores faith. "You do not understand yet what it takes to hold a village together." "No," Amechi said. "What I do not understand is how a man who has stolen the village's land for 15 years, and who chose an innocent girl to die in order to protect his secret, how that man talks about holding a village together with a straight face." He turned away from the elder then. He turned to face the 300 people standing on the bank, the river behind him, the gray morning sky above all of them. "I have something to say to this village," he said, not as the chief's son, not as a council member, as a man who was born here and who loves this village with everything he has, including the parts of it that have disappointed him. He paused. "Obiageli did not choose this. She has never in her life been given a real choice about anything. She grew up in a room too small for her to stretch her arms. She cooked other people's food and carried other people's water, and she did it without bitterness, without complaint, with a dignity that shames every single person who watched her suffer and said nothing. She did not deserve to be made an orphan. She did not deserve to grow up without protection. And she does not deserve to die so that a guilty man can sleep peacefully." His voice was steady, but his chest was full of something without a name, something that had been building for years, for every time he had watched her and said nothing. "No river god," he said, "accepts an offering made through fear. No true tradition demands the life of the innocent, and no village worth the name survives by feeding its children to the darkness, whenever the darkness frightens it." He walked back to where Obiageli was standing. The 2 elder women had released her arms. They were looking at Elder as he was looking at the ground. Amechi stood in front of Obiageli, close enough to see the steadiness in her eyes, that deep, Rivacum steadiness that had always been her most extraordinary quality, and that she had never once asked anyone to notice. "You are not an offering," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You never were. If this story is moving you, subscribe now. The ending will change how you see everything." That afternoon, Chief Odinaka called the full council to an emergency sitting. He had spent the morning in his room. His servants said he did not eat. He sat very still for a very long time, with the kind of stillness that a man only finds when he has decided to stop avoiding something true. When he emerged, he was dressed in the full regalia of his office, the coral beads heavy at his neck, the eagle feathers in his cap, the red cloth of authority wrapped around his shoulders, and he walked to the council house with the slow, deliberate step of a man who has made his decision and is not going to unmake it. Obina Nuachuku presented the documents formally before the assembled council. He read them aloud, slowly and clearly, in a voice that did not waver. He explained what the seal meant. He explained what the illegal transfer meant. He explained, in patient and devastating detail, how long it had been happening, who had benefited, and what it had cost the village. By the time he finished, 4 of the 7 elders were openly refusing to meet Elder Ezugo's eyes. Chief Odinaka stood. The room was very quiet. "Elder Ezugo served this council for 15 years, the chief said. "In those years, he was given authority. He was given the trust of this community. He used that trust to take from the very people who gave it to him. And he used the fear of an entire village, fear of flood, fear of hunger, fear of an angry god, to cover what he had stolen. And when covering was not enough, he chose a child without parents and called her a gift to the river. He paused. Outside, the wind moved through the palm trees, carrying the smell of rain that was still far away. Elderezugo is stripped of his position on this council, effective today. The land records will be corrected, and the North Bank land returned formally to the community. Every family whose plot falls on that land will be informed that they have been farming their own land all along. Any payments made to Elderezugo will be investigated, and if it is found that the circumstances of Chukuri's death were anything other than natural, that matter will be taken to a higher authority than this council. Elderezugo sat through all of it without speaking. His walking stick lay across his knees. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance, on nothing. On the particular nothing that is all that is left when authority, power, and the respect of your community have been taken back from you all at once. When it was over, he rose without a word and walked out of the council house. He would live in Yumus for the rest of his years, but he would never again sit in the council house. He would never again speak first at any gathering. The village would not chase him out, because this was not that kind of village, and because the chief believed that exile from relevance, from the respect that had been this man's great pleasure and great weapon, was a consequence sufficient for a man like him. Perhaps it was, some punishments are carried on the inside, in the silence of a house where no one comes any more. What the village would talk about for the rest of that generation happened not in the council house, but beneath the great mango tree, in what had been Chukuri's compound. Amechi had sent neighbors ahead to clean the compound, while the council sat. When Obiagili arrived, still wearing the white cloth of offering, because no one had thought to bring her something else, and perhaps because she was not yet ready to take it off, she found the compound swept clean, the walls freshly patched with new mud, and a small fire burning low beneath the mango tree. She stood in the entrance for a long time. She looked at the old walls, the repaired thatch, the tree under which her father used to sit in the evenings, singing the old songs softly to himself while the sun went down, and the village settled into its nighttime sounds. She looked at the place where she had been a child, the place she had come from before grief had come for her. And then she did what she had not done at the river. She sat down on the ground beneath the mango tree, placed her face in her hands, and cried. She cried for a long time. For her father, for the years in that small, dark room. For the morning at the river, no one hurried her. No one told her to stop. Amici sat on the ground a little distance away, his back against the compound wall, and kept her company in silence. The way you keep company with someone who needs to know they are not alone without making their grief smaller by rushing it. When she finally lifted her face, her eyes were swollen and her cheeks were wet, and she looked, somehow, lighter. The way the sky looks after rain. Cleaner. With more room in it. My father hid the truth, she said, because he thought it would protect me. It did, Amechi said. She looked at him steadily. You came to the river. I was late, he said. She almost smiled. You were exactly on time. She looked up through the branches of the mango tree at the heavy afternoon sky, gray and full of water. Tensa sighed quietly. To? No one in particular. Or perhaps to her father. Wherever fathers go. I kept rising. 6 months later, the river Ogi fell to its lowest level in 10 years. The farmer said it was a good sign. The remaining honest elders said, quietly, without ceremony, that perhaps the river had never wanted blood at all. Perhaps what the river wanted was for the village to be honest with itself, to stop feeding its fear and start trusting its people. Perhaps that was the offering that had always been required. Obiageli moved back into her father's compound. She repaired it slowly, room by room, with the help of neighbors who came without being asked, women who arrived with plastering mud, men who brought fresh thatch, children who pulled weeds from the garden with their small determined hands until their palms were dirty and they were proud of themselves. The compound filled with sound and warmth again. The mango tree stood and gave shade to everything beneath it. She planted a garden, yams and cassava and bitterleaf and waterleaf, in rows that her father would have recognized. And near the compound wall, a small patch of groundnuts, the way he had always planted them, for good luck and for the pleasure of watching green things grow from dark earth. She went back to school, the secondary school in the neighboring town that she had stopped attending when her uncle's patience ran out and his charity dried up. She was older than most of the other students, and she did not care. She sat in the front row. She paid attention. She wrote in her notebooks with the careful focus of someone who has learned in her bones that time is not a thing to waste. Ameshi came to find her one evening, 3 months after the day at the river. He came without ceremony, without elaborate preparation, the way he did most things. Quietly, directly, honestly. He knocked at the compound gate. She opened it. Obiageli, he said, "I would like to speak with your uncle. If you are willing." She looked at him for a long moment, that deep river calm look that saw clearly and did not pretend. Then she said, "He is inside. I'll make tea." They were married the following dry season, in a ceremony that the whole village attended, including, it should be said, several people who had stood silent on the riverbank that morning and who now understood, in their own time and in their own way, the weight of that silence. They came because they loved Obia. They came because a wedding is one of the places where a village can begin to heal itself. Chief Odinaka danced at the wedding. He danced badly and with enormous enthusiasm, and no one had the heart to tell him to stop. And everyone loved him for it. Obina Nuachuku sat in the seat of honor and wept openly and did not apologize for it. Her father would have been so proud, he said to anyone who would listen. So proud. The North Bank land was returned formally to the community. The village council established a land trust with elected members and a record-keeping system held by 2 separate families, so that no one person could quietly move the documents again. The farming families who had unknowingly paid rent to Elder Izugo were given back what could be traced. The rest went toward building something Yumu's had never built for itself before, a small school at the edge of the village, constructed with the community's own hands and its own resources, with the community's own name carved above the door. Obiageli taught there on Friday afternoons when the school week was done. She taught the younger children their letters and their numbers, and how to read a document carefully, and what to do when something in a document does not match what you have been told. And sometimes, when the lesson was done and the children were tired and leaning warm against each other in the afternoon shade, she would tell them stories. Stories about her father, about hiding truth in the dark earth, and trusting that the right person would know to dig for it, about a river that did not want blood. About a morning at the water's edge, when the whole village held its breath and one man on a horse came exactly on time. The children never forgot those stories. Because the most powerful things in this world are not the loud things, not the thrones, not the walking sticks, not the voices that speak first in every room. The most powerful things are the quiet, stubborn, unbeatable acts of a person who refuses to stop rising, even when no one is watching, even when they are standing barefoot in cold mud at the river's edge, dressed in white, with nothing but their own courage to carry them forward. And courage, it turns out, is the one thing that cannot be taken from you. No matter how small your room, no matter how long you have been alone, no matter how many people stand silent on the bank and wait to see what you will do next. Thank you for joining us for this story. Subscribe to our channel and click the bell so you never miss a story. Watch our next story right here.